I mean, think about it. If you walked into a modern gym today and proudly announced to the room that you were fueling up with a massive basket of bread, you would probably be laughed right out of the building.
Oh, absolutely. They'd look at you like you were crazy.
Right. Because we have somehow turned carbohydrates and wheat in particular into, like, public enemy number one. In our modern diet culture, telling someone you eat wheat is almost like confessing to a crime.
Yeah, there is this really intense, almost visceral fear of the grain today.
There really is. But there is a massive disconnect here. Because if you rewind the clock and look at ancient texts, specifically biblical texts, wheat was the absolute ultimate blessing. It wasn't something you avoided to, look good for the summer. It was the foundation of human vitality.
It really is a profound inversion of how we view food today.
Hmm.
Because in the ancient agrarian world, your relationship with wheat was literally your relationship with survival.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, to have a storehouse of wheat meant you possessed security, prosperity, and, well, a future.
So, okay, let's unpack this a bit. Because our mission for today's deep dive, for you listening, is to bridge that massive gap. We are looking at a truly fascinating body of work detailing the biblical diet, and we're specifically zooming in on wheat today.
Right, which is a huge topic.
It is. And the goal is to synthesize that ancient spiritual reverence for the grain with hard modern nutritional science. And the text we're analyzing sets up this premise beautifully by pulling a quote from Psalm 81, verse 16.
Yeah, that's a brilliant starting point.
It really struck me. It notes that when God wanted to paint a picture of feeding his people with the absolute best provision imaginable, he didn't reach for like a rare delicacy or some exotic fruit. The verse says he would have fed them with the finest of the wheat.
And what makes this synthesis so compelling is that the document we're looking at refuses to treat wheat merely as, a line item on a grocery list.
Right.
Instead, it uses this single grain as a comprehensive lens. So, through an understanding of wheat, we're actually looking at ancient macroeconomics, the raw physical mechanics of staying alive, and perhaps, most surprisingly, the foundations of modern preventative cardiology.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. We are looking at a literal bridge between ancient theology and human physiology.
Yeah, and just think about how fundamentally this crop anchored daily life back then. I mean, it literally drove their concept of time and their entire calendar.
Exactly.
The source material emphasizes that wheat was the very first staple grain of the Promised Land. It was this ultimate social equalizer, right? It was sitting on the rough wooden table of the poorest laborer, but also on the ornate dining table of the king.
And we see that undeniable priority codified in the most sacred texts of the era. Like if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8, there's this famous poetic list of the good things the land would provide.
Oh, right, the catalog of abundance.
Yes, exactly. But look at the order. What is listed first? Boar of a barley, before the sprawling vines, before the fig trees and the pomegranates, comes wheat.
Uh-huh.
In a world without global supply chains or refrigeration, an abundance of wheat meant the existential dread of starvation was just lifted from your family.
So wheat was essentially the ancient world's gold standard and calendar app all rolled into one.
Basically.
Yeah, because the entire rhythm of their year turned on its harvest. The text highlights a mandate in Exodus 34 for something called the Feast of Weeks.
Right, which was a massive deal.
Yeah, it was this huge communal celebration of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, which later evolved into a celebration of Pentecost. They took the absolute best, the very first yield of the crop, and brought it forward in Thanksgiving.
And it was entirely interwoven into their physical acts of worship, too. The tabernacle, which was the absolute center of their spiritual community, heavily involved wheat in its rituals.
With the grain offerings.
Exactly. Leviticus chapter 2 describes specific grain offerings composed of fine flour. And inside the holy space, there were the 12 loaves of the bread of the presence, sitting continually on display.
Wow, so it was a physical, tangible sign of a spiritual covenant.
Yes. Wheat was never merely a commodity to be bought and sold. I mean, it was a divine gift, a sacrificial offering, and this deeply profound symbol of life itself.
Which completely explains why it serves as the driving engine behind so many massive narrative moments in these texts. Consider the story of Joseph in Egypt.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. When he was tasked with saving an entire empire from a devastating 7-year famine, he didn't hoard gold or silver. He stockpiled Egyptian wheat.
Yeah.
And that single logistical action saved his family and preserved the lineage for the rest of the biblical narrative. And then, you have the story of Ruth.
Which is entirely centered around the harvest.
Exactly. Her entire future is determined while she is physically gleaning in the fields during the wheat and barley harvests. That act of daily survival leads her directly to the threshing floor of Boaz.
And, the threshing floor is a brilliant detail for us to focus on here because it perfectly illustrates that intersection of physical reality and spiritual metaphor.
How so?
Well, the threshing floor was the physical space where the harvested grain was violently separated from the inedible chaff. They usually used heavy wooden sledges and the wind to do this.
So it was just incredibly hard work.
Oh, yeah. It was a place of intense, backbreaking, sweaty human labor.
Right.
But throughout the Old Testament, the threshing floor repeatedly serves as the stage for profound covenant meanings and divine encounters.
Wow.
The raw, physical act of processing wheat to sustain the body was deeply tied to spiritual revelation.
That is so interesting. And then, you fast forward a few centuries, and Jesus is utilizing that exact same cultural weight.
Constant.
Yeah. He constantly uses agricultural metaphors, like talking about a single seed of wheat falling to the ground and dying in order to bear fruit, or the complex parable of the wheat and the tares growing together in the same field.
Right.
But the ultimate statement is when he calls himself the bread of life. And when you grasp the historical context we just discussed, you realize how impossibly heavy that statement actually is.
It changes everything.
It does. Calling yourself the bread of life back then wasn't just some light poetic metaphor. It was like standing in front of a crowd today and saying, I am the oxygen you breathe.
Yeah, that is the only accurate way to frame it. The imagery only carries that kind of theological weight because a loaf of wheat bread was the one food literally no household could survive the winter without.
Right.
To claim that title was to claim absolute fundamental necessity for human existence.
Okay, so let's unpack a massive contradiction here. Because if ancient texts promise life, vitality, and spiritual wholeness from wheat, but modern diet culture promises lethargy, bloating, and inflammation, what is actually happening in our modern food system to cause that split?
That is the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. How did a blessing become a burden? And the text is incredibly clear on this. The answer lies entirely in what we physically started doing to the grain itself. We basically decided we knew better and we broke it.
We industrialized it and, in the process, we stripped it of its biological identity.
Which is tragic.
It really is. To truly understand why this happened, we have to put a single kernel of whole wheat under a microscope. There are 3 distinct, vital anatomical parts to that grain, and human biology relies on every single one of them.
Okay.
First, you have the outermost layer, which is the bran.
Which is where all the heavy-hitting nutrients are hiding out, because that fibrous outer shell is absolutely packed with dietary fiber, essential B vitamins, and crucial minerals. But then, inside that protective shell, you have the germ, right? Which is essentially the living embryo of the seed.
Precisely. The germ is the biological heart of the wheat. This is where you find the highest concentration of vitamin E, an array of healthy plant fats, and even more B vitamins.
Okay, and the third part?
Finally, making it the bulk of the kernel is the third part, the endosperm. This is the large, starchy center, and its primary biological purpose is simply to provide raw carbohydrate energy for the seed to actually sprout.
So when you consume wheat as wholemeal, meaning you keep the bran, the germ, and the endosperm locked together exactly as nature designed, it delivers plant protein, magnesium, potassium, iron, zinc, and a whole host of complex plant compounds.
It's incredibly nutrient-dense.
Yeah, the text even mentions specific compounds like lignans and ferulic acid. And for anyone listening wondering what those do, you can think of them as cellular rust-proofing. They act as powerful antioxidants that roam around neutralizing the free radicals that cause oxidative stress and aging in our bodies.
That is the profile of a nutritional powerhouse. Yeah. But this is where we run into the great tragedy of modern food processing.
The refining.
Right. Why would the food industry look at a perfectly designed, nutrient-dense grain and decide to strip out all the good stuff?
Money.
Basically, yes. It comes down to basic economics and shelf life. Because the germ contains those healthy, active plant fats, it can eventually go rancid if left sitting around too long.
Ah, so the industry prioritized logistics over human biology.
Exactly. By utilizing aggressive refining processes to completely strip away the bran and the germ, the food industry creates a lifeless, pure white powder that can sit in bags on a supermarket shelf for months or even years without spoiling.
Wow.
We traded our cardiovascular and metabolic health for indefinite shelf life. We literally throw away the fiber, the minerals, the healthy fats, and the vitamins, leaving behind almost nothing but that pure starchy endosperm.
But Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit infuriating. Refining wheat like this, it's like going to a high-end dealership and buying a top-of-the-line luxury vehicle, but before you drive it off the lot, you tell the mechanic to rip out the engine, remove the navigation system, and take out all the airbags.
That's a great way to picture it.
You just want to push an empty, shiny chassis down the street. You are left with the starch, but you completely threw away the actual machinery that does the biological work for your body.
Like captures the absurdity of it perfectly.
Mhm.
You are consuming the calories of the vehicle, but removing everything that makes it function safely within your digestive system.
And the biological impact of eating that empty chassis is wild. Like, eating an intact whole grain of wheat is like putting a massive, dense oak log on a campfire, right? It burns slow, steady, and controlled, giving you sustained energy for hours.
Yes.
But eating refined white flour, that is like throwing a cup of pure gasoline onto that same fire. You get a massive, immediate, explosive spike in your blood sugar, followed by a total metabolic crash.
The document does not mince words regarding this distinction either. It states unequivocally that any health benefits historically associated with this grain belong squarely and exclusively to wholemeal, whole grain, and stone-ground wheat.
So no fluffy white bread in ancient times?
No. The text clarifies that the ancient texts were never talking about fluffy white bread. The distinction between whole and refined isn't just a minor dietary preference. It is the fundamental determining factor of whether the food will heal you or harm you.
Wait, let me push back here for a second on behalf of the listener, because we hear constantly that whole grains are good for your heart. But a lot of people try to eat a couple of slices of whole wheat bread every day, and they still struggle significantly with things like high blood pressure.
Right.
Is wheat really moving the needle that much biologically, or is this ancient text slightly overstating the modern medical reality?
Yeah, and I think this raises an important question about how we evaluate food today. That's a highly necessary point of skepticism. And it brings us to one of the most refreshing aspects of this source material.
Right.
Yeah, it handles the modern science with remarkable integrity. The text explicitly states that wheat is a supporting player for healthy blood pressure, not a standalone magical cure.
I love that.
It acknowledges that biological health does not work through magic bullets. If your overall lifestyle is highly stressful and your diet is poor, adding a slice of whole wheat bread will not suddenly cure hypertension.
I love the honesty there, because in an internet culture dominated by clickbait articles claiming like one weird berry or one exotic seed will cure every ailment you have, this approach is remarkably humble. It just quietly does its mechanical job in the background of your biology.
And we can look at the exact mechanisms of action to understand how it does that job.
Let's do it.
So when you consume the intact grain, you are deploying a sophisticated three-pronged support system into your bloodstream. First, you have the dietary fiber from the bran.
Right.
That fiber physically slows down digestion, preventing those blood sugar spikes we just talked about. And it supports maintaining a healthy body weight over time.
Which is huge for blood pressure.
Exactly. Both stable blood sugar and healthy weight are non-negotiable variables for managing long-term blood pressure.
And then the minerals step in to do the heavy lifting, right?
Yes, specifically the magnesium provided by the bran and the germ. Magnesium has a direct, measurable physiological effect inside your body. It is heavily involved in relaxing the smooth muscle tissue that lines the walls of your blood vessels.
Okay, so it physically relaxes the tissue.
Right. And when those microscopic muscles relax, the blood vessels naturally widen. This phenomenon, called vasodilation, creates more space for the blood to flow, which naturally lowers the pressure against the vessel walls.
So when you are standing in the grocery store looking at the bread aisle, trying to decide between the white loaf and the wholemeal loaf, you are actually making a direct choice about the tension of the smooth muscle tissue inside your own blood vessels.
You really are.
That is a wild way to think about grocery shopping.
It absolutely is. And the third prong of this system is potassium. The potassium found naturally in the whole grain steps in to balance the sodium levels in your body.
Oh, because of the sodium-potassium pump?
Yes, exactly. Your cells operate on a very delicate sodium-potassium pump. If you have too much salt and not enough potassium, your body retains water, which raises your blood pressure.
Right.
Balancing that ratio with potassium-rich foods is widely considered by cardiologists to be one of the most important dietary levers you can pull.
So fiber manages the weight and the sugar, magnesium physically widens the pipes, and potassium flushes the excess salt. It really is a complete biological toolkit.
Which perfectly explains why whole grain wheat is a named foundational cornerstone of the DISH eating pattern.
The ASH being dietary approaches to stop hypertension.
Yes, it remains one of the most rigorously evidenced, scientifically validated dietary approaches in the world for cardiovascular health. But the operative word there is pattern.
Pattern, yeah.
DISH works because it is a comprehensive way of eating rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, pulses, and nuts. Wheat sits naturally inside that broader pattern. It earns its place honestly through decades of clinical research.
Okay, so we understand the profound ancient reverence. We know exactly what happens when you separate the bran, germ, and endosperm. And we see the honest mechanical science regarding cardiovascular health.
Right?
So how do we practically put this on the listener's table tonight? And for that matter, who actually did the work of putting all this incredible research together?
Well, the practical guidance provided here is straightforward, but it does require intentionality at the supermarket. The primary rule is choose whole and choose older.
Choose older.
Yes. It encourages us to look past modern, hyper-processed products and explore more traditional forms of intact wheat that haven't been, pulverized into dust.
So we're talking about things like bulgur, freekeh, and cracked wheat.
Exactly. Those preparations keep the architecture of the grain almost entirely intact, preserving that slow-burn energy profile we want. And when you do need flour for baking, seeking out stone-ground wholemeal flour ensures that the crucial bran and germ haven't been sifted out during a mechanized milling process.
But there is a massive label warning we need to pass on to you before you head to the store.
Yes, this is so important.
Because the food industry knows you are looking for healthier options, so they use marketing deception. You have to be incredibly careful with breads claiming to be wheat flour or multigrain.
They sound healthy, but they aren't always.
Exactly. Those sound healthy, but unless the ingredient list specifically says the words wholemeal or whole grain as the very first ingredient, you are very often just buying refined white flour that has been dyed with a little bit of caramel coloring to look rustic.
It's terrible.
It is an empty chassis painted brown. You have to read the labels honestly.
It is a critical warning. And beyond just selecting the right grain, the text offers brilliant advice on how to actually eat it. Wheat was never meant to be eaten in isolation, loaded with sugar or artificial preservatives. It is best kept in what the authors call good company.
Good company. That's a fantastic phrase. What does that look like on a plate?
It means pairing your whole grains with high-quality olive oil, hearty lentils, rich beans, and an abundance of fresh vegetables. This is a direct reflection of the diverse, plant-heavy table of the ancient Mediterranean world.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Doesn't it? Think of a warm bowl of bulgur wheat tossed with roasted vegetables and a generous pour of peppery olive oil.
Or honestly, just taking a thick, warm piece of actual stone-ground wholemeal bread and dipping it directly into a dish of olive oil instead of spreading it with processed butter.
Yes, absolutely.
Framing it like that completely changes the paradigm, because that doesn't sound like a restrictive, miserable, heart-healthy diet. It sounds like a delicious, rustic feast. It brings the joy back to eating.
It restores the fundamental dignity to the grain. And, this entire paradigm, this meticulous pairing of hard clinical nutritional science with deep ancient reverence, is not just a loose collection of ideas.
Right.
This research is drawn from a groundbreaking anthropological and medical synthesis created by the Holy Trinity Healing Ministries, known as HTHM.
Yes, and you can explore their entire project at htm.org.uk.
The primary author and researcher behind this is the Right Reverend Dr. Alando Watkis. And what Dr. Watkis has done here is remarkable. This isn't just a simple recipe collection.
It's way more than that.
It really is. The project takes specific foundational foods, pairs them directly with their ancient biblical verses, and then places that historical context right alongside modern clinical cardiology and nutrition notes.
So you were literally reading the chapter and verse spiritual context on one side of the page and the cellular biology on the other.
Exactly.
And they have produced an entire library of this work. It includes titles like The Complete Biblical Cookbook, Ancient Scripture with Modern Science, which actually maps out a full 7-day meal plan to help you reset your habits.
Which is so practical.
Yeah. They also published 50 modern meals from biblical ingredients, 100 biblical breakfasts, 100 biblical dinners, and even biblical desserts. It is a complete systemic rebuilding of how we approach our everyday kitchens, rooted in texts that have survived for millennia.
It serves as an open invitation to bring the ancient biblical table directly into the modern kitchen, honoring both our spiritual heritage and the complex physiological realities of the human body.
So, what does this all mean for you at the end of the day? It means it is time to rethink the breadbasket.
Absolutely.
When wheat is respected, kept whole, and unrefined, consumed exactly as ancient peoples consumed it on the threshing floor, it absolutely lives up to its ancient reputation as the finest of provisions.
Yes.
It quietly and faithfully supports our modern cardiovascular health by giving us a slow burn of energy, physically relaxing our blood vessels with magnesium, and balancing our sodium levels.
It does its job.
We just have to be willing to look past the modern fear-mongering around carbohydrates, read our grocery labels with a critical eye, and maybe try cooking up a bowl of frika or dipping some real, honest wholemeal bread in olive oil this week.
To tie the physical biology and the spiritual history together perfectly, the source material offers a powerful tagline that summarizes this entire philosophy.
So let's hear it.
It reads, God gave us two provisions for our healing, faith to feed the spirit and the harvest to nourish the body. Where the word and the wheat meet, wholeness begins.
Where the word and the wheat meet, wholeness begins. I love the imagery of that. And it leaves me with one final thought I want to pass on to you to mull over today. We have just spent this entire deep dive looking at how modern processing took our most foundational food wheat and methodically stripped away its most valuable, life-giving parts, all just to make it look a little whiter, a little smoother, and to last indefinitely on a supermarket shelf.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, what other staples in our modern lives, perhaps far beyond just the food on our plates, maybe the way we consume information or how we build our communities, have we refined and processed to the point that they have completely lost their original sustaining purpose? Something to think about the next time you're holding a slice of bread. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.